Hello, it's Steve Davis here, and welcome. Welcome to the 10th anniversary, 10th birthday episode of the Adelaide Show podcast. It's been a long and very winding road, especially if I remember the trip that we took to Mannum through the Adelaide Hills for the Games Expo that was held there a few years ago. A windy road indeed. In fact, that'll tie us into the song we're playing this week, which is it was from the album named after Route 31, which is another windy seaside road that stretches down the Fleurieu Peninsula, but more on that later. I actually have a month of Tuesdays lined up to celebrate this milestone that's important for us, and I hope will be edifying to you as well. Tonight, here's the plan. I have a very special guest, and it breaks all the rules to have this guest on the podcast. His name is Owen Eastwood. He's a New Zealander of Maori descent. He's an author, and his book, Belonging, which is all about understanding community, being part of community, really affected me over the summer of 2022-2023. It's eking into my life personally and also professionally through Talked About Marketing, thanks to David Olney, my colleague and fellow podcaster who put me in touch with him. So we are so lucky to have this chat with Owen lined up to really get down into the weeds of understanding what it means to be human and to be a human connected to other humans and the place you're in. I really hope you enjoy this interview, but also buy his book. It really is a fantastic read. He has been to Adelaide, so perhaps there's a tenuous reason to give him a temporary visa to let him into our world. Plus, we're experimenting with the community in my day job. I talked about marketing with David, following his principles. So it really is a beautiful book. Anyway, here's the month of Tuesdays. Tonight, Owen Eastwood. Next Tuesday night, we have a very special retrospective episode with the boys who helped me create the original manifestation of this podcast. It was originally called Another Boring Thursday Night in Adelaide. And we'll explain all of that if you're new to this. Back then, Adelaide was the butt of many jokes around Australia as the boring city. And we were fed up with that because it was, quite frankly, BS. And as a result, we met it head on with a provocative title, drawn from a Red Gum song, which was One More Boring Thursday Night in Adelaide. And through this, we got to meet John Schumann, who's now a good friend of the podcast. He's been a guest twice. Amazing human as well. Anyway, Colin and Brett are back, and the three of us have a meandering journey down memory lane. Lots of that chatter, which was the nature of the podcast when it first began. So that's next Tuesday night at the time of listening to this. The following Tuesday night, so the third of our month of Tuesdays, will be our second retrospective, and it will feature Nigel Dobson. Nigel's back, and we have a different conversation, capturing the essence of what the years were like when Nigel and I were the main planks of this podcast. And the final retrospective to wrap up our month of Tuesdays, Adelaide hairdresser, trivia extraordinaire, Don Violi is joining us. He was one of our most present guests. We had him a number of times and also very popular. He stirred up lots of commentary. He seems to remember with photographic detail so many things from our past here in Australia, South Australia and Adelaide. So a special one with Don. So that's our plan. Hope you enjoy it. I should say, we've got an essay drink of the week in just a moment from 2016. I'll talk more about that in 2 secs. Final thoughts on the introduction to this 10th birthday episode. At the moment, on our homepage of our website, this is the wording that's currently there that was inspired by Owen Eastwood's book. Here's what it reads at the moment. Welcome to the Adelaide Show podcast community. You are not alone. There are hundreds of fellow South Australians awaiting you in our episodes. Have a listen. Many of them will inspire you to continue or discover an endeavour that fulfills you. We have a great community here in South Australia. While it's not perfect, it has sustained many people to build connections and follow passions in ways that have enabled our state to punch above its weight on the world stage. But as Dr. Jane Goodall said back in episode 42, the best way to make our world a better place is to start with the square metre you're standing on and build from there. To help you find your people, we've sorted our episodes into categories. If you browse the list, you'll be able to start with the themes and topics closer to your heart. That said, in the process of putting the passion of South Australia on centre stage, we uncover some surprising people and insights. And so we encourage you to chance your arm and listen to some random episodes. It might just be what you needed to hear. And if you're here right now, I'm hoping this will be one of those interviews that you needed to hear, one of those episodes. So if it's your first listen, welcome. I hope you enjoy this and feel encouraged to explore other episodes, as well as, obviously, let friends know about the Adelaide show and whack it on their phone. If you're a regular, seriously, thank you very much. All of you, especially Alexis, who always raises his glass and has a drink whenever I mention that I lived in Hungary for a couple of years. You've all been part of this community. Knowing you've been there, occasionally hearing from you, very important to a community endeavour like this one. It's been hard work, it's been an absolute joy, and it's introduced me to many, many people and places throughout South Australia. Even Keith Conlon, Mr. South Australia, has been part of this podcast a number of times. There's more where they came from. So how much longer will this continue going? I don't know. But right now, I intend to keep making every conversation count, and I'll continue to be grateful for every single minute you let me put the passion of South Australia on centre stage for you. Thanks for listening. Enjoy the show.
Wave on waves since the gun of the bedroom. Adelaide, 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 who landed here and made it their home. Adelaide, Adelaide, who 10-pound bombs to the refugees. Adelaide, Adelaide, who brings Italian Sudanese. Adelaide, Adelaide, who oh, little Adelaide, oh, Adelaide, who oh, little Adelaide, who.
In the spirit of reconciliation, the Adelaide Show podcast acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout South Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today.
Adelaide, Adelaide, Adelaide.
We have a special wine this episode, the 2016 Zima Estate Cabernet Sauvignon. Now, I'm just going to open it. There we go. And I'm going to decant this. And I'll tell you why. A number of years ago, we gave Wolf Blass a lift home. And in the car from a wine event, my wife used to work with the company he was involved in. And bear with me 2 secs while I just fill this up without spilling everywhere. Bear with me. Here we go. Now, his advice was that you should decant wine, but if it's very young or very old, you should decant it twice. Other than that, you can get away with just a single decant. And given this is a 2016, it's now 2023, and it's a Cabernet Sauvignon from Coonawarra, I would say this is not old. And it's not young. So I'm just doing the single decant. And good news, I didn't spill anything. On the very first episode of the Adelaide Show, the cork disintegrated, wine went everywhere. So let's have a little sip of this right now as I start. Firstly, as we always do, by raising my glass and toasting our late patron, Queen Adelaide. To the Queen. All right, let's have a little taste of this, and I'll explain the significance of this drop. Bear with me. Oh, my goodness. Oh. Have you seen... Oh, wow. Have you seen those suspense movies, things like Die Hard, where chaos is going in, they're at the top of a skyscraper, they prise open the lift doors, and lo and behold, there's no lift there, and they would just plummet down to the bottom if they just stepped inside it. That's what just happened on my palate. It was sitting here very nicely. In goes the wine. One more time. Oh, and there it is. The tannins on this wine just completely ensconce your tongue, and all the moisture just goes kaboom and plummets out of your mouth. They're not the biggest tannins I've ever had, but they have that classic, slightly eucalyptus tinged flavour to them, as the wine does on the palate. But those tannins, boom. Now, once that's happened, it's almost like if you see what is it? This happens a lot in cartoons, but also suspense movies. The predator comes past, and as it gets closer, the heroes, everyone hides in the bushes. The predator goes past, and then they emerge again. That's what's happened to some of the subtleties of this wine. As the tannins have roared past or plummeted down the elevator shaft, the good guys, the different flavours, are now poking their heads back and sussing out the situation. I'll just see what I can get on the palate here. Bear with me 2 seconds. Beautiful, simple red, dark red colour here. And just, I'm getting if you were flicking through a fruit catalogue and there was a page with various red and black berries of different types, that's what it's like. At this age, the fruit is not necessarily dominating, but it's there, like a catalogue that you're flicking through, and you're just glancing at that photo of those different fruits. Very pleasant. This is... I'd actually go so far to say this is in its prime right now. Now, the reason that I chose this wine is that one of my fondest memories of doing the Adelaide show back in 2016, when this wine was just being bottled, was a road trip that Nigel Dobson and I took down to Mount Gambier. We recorded a special interview with Maria and Walter from Cafe Belgiorno in Mount Gambier. It's a must-visit place if you head down there. Magnificent food, and as you'll see if you go to episode 139, on the table that night is a bottle of this, the Zima Estate Cabernet Sauvignon. It wasn't the 2016 because that wouldn't have been out, it was the 2012, and that went down an absolute treat. Lots of memories, lots of very moving human stories in that episode, if you haven't caught up with it yet. It's called Mount Gambier is a Noise Ploys, Stories from Cafe Belgiorno. Anyway, I'll just continue sipping this wine as things continue with the interviews. All that's left for me to say is the Zima Estate Coonawarra Cabernet Sauvignon 2016 is the South Australian drink of the week.
Hi, it's Kim Perling on the Adelaide show with Steve Davis, and I just want to remind you all to make sure that the arts is alive and well, not only where you live, but also in your life.
Owen Eastwood is an author and performance coach, among other things, who happens to be a New Zealander of Maori descent. He works with some of the world's leading athletes, sporting teams, business leaders, entrepreneurs, performing artists. Well, over our last summer, I read his book, Belonging, The Ancient Code of Togetherness, and it's had a profound impact on my life, not least of which for Owen's engaging description of whakapapa, a Maori idea which embodies our universal human need to belong. Well, they say hindsight is a 20/20 vision, and as I look back on 10 years of creating my passion project, the Adelaide Show, I can't help but think I missed the bullseye of making something truly grounded in community. And to that end, I'm honoured to have Owen on the line from the UK to distill his concepts of community and belonging and hopefully tease out some approaches to grounding this or any other projects more squarely within one's community. Owen Eastwood, welcome to the Adelaide Show.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you here. Look, I truly recommend your book to our leaders. Please don't just sup with this interview, read it. It's called Belonging. But for the purpose of this interview, I fear I need to ask you to help define some terms and lay some foundations for our listeners. And the first of which is, of course, this enigmatic term, whakapapa. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. What is your working definition? I just gave a very short version there. How do you define it, Owen?
Well, I think it's an beautiful ancient idea which encapsulates belonging to me. And belonging is all about all the people you are connected with. So the idea of whakapapa is this very simple concept that each of us are part of a line of people with our arms locked together, going all the way back to our origin story. And that can be our nation, our family, the team, the Adelaide Show, the business. Any community of people has an origin story. And so we are part of a line of people that goes back to that origin story. Or if we're a startup, perhaps we are the origin story right now. Mm. But we're also part of a line of people that are going to follow us to the end of time. And this is this ancient idea. And the metaphor is that the sun first shines on our founders, our first ancestors, our origin story, and then slowly moves down this line of people. And ultimately, our time will be revealed when it's our turn to be in that sun and to be the guardian of that community and to leave a legacy in that community. And also to make sure that we do it in a way where the people who follow us will benefit from. So, I was introduced to this idea when I was 12, and it gave me a really powerful sense of belonging to not only the Maori tribe, but all my, communities. Mm. But secondly, as a performance coach, it's given me a fantastic framework, really, to how we build a powerful team culture.
Yeah. I actually first encountered your book in the audiobook version, and I remember it was actually quite emotional hearing that first story, where you heard the words from your Maori tribe that you belong here. That's pretty profound. It's disarmingly profound because we don't tend to talk in those terms in general parlance in society, do we?
No, I mean, it's pretty clear now there is another silent pandemic which is happening, and that is people are feeling more and more lonely and chronically isolated across the world in ways they never have before. People feeling less connected to community. Technology, etc., has accelerated all of that. But it is a fundamental human need to belong, and you can even measure that through things like anxiety levels. We generally feel a lot less anxious when we are with people who we feel we belong with. It makes sense. So it's an absolute massive well-being health issue that we're going to have to face up to. And you're right. Just someone, as a 12-year-old, I was a bit lost. My father died when I was 5, and I didn't really know who I was and didn't really have a lot of self-esteem or confidence. So for someone to look you square in the eye and say, I see you and you belong here, it is incredibly powerful. And when I work with teams now, one of my personal agenda items is to make sure that everybody in our environment has that exact message, not in a subtle figure it out implicit way, but just look them between the eyes when they come into our environment and tell them you're here for a reason, you belong here.
Which is so important for the person hearing that, but also for the person saying that. I'd have to say, if you're listening to this conversation, if that last bit didn't make the hairs on your neck stand up, or prickled, there is something a little bit deadened within, you know. Another book I read over summer, it was a wonderful summer of reading, was Dopamine Nation by Professor Anna Lemke from, I think she's from Harvard. And she argues that we have pleasure on tap. Hence, we can get a dopamine kick from chocolate, from alcohol, from drugs, from Netflix. And I can't help but think part of this other pandemic, this hidden pandemic of not feeling connected, is the fact that we can numb ourselves with this en masse dopamine hit. That surely, do you concur? Is that something also that's at play here?
Yeah, the hormonal part is huge, and it's one thing I learned as a performance coach. My previous career, I was actually a lawyer for 15 years before I became a performance coach, and so I've had to learn it all, not in an institutional way. I haven't got degrees around coaching. I've sort of had to learn it through experience. One of the things that's clear when you actually really have to work with people under huge amounts of pressure, performing in a World Cup or those type of things, is that the hormonal state is everything. You tend to think, we have a mindset and everything flows from that, but it's actually not true. What actually happens is you have a hormonal state which informs your mindset. So if you're extremely anxious, then that will inform your mindset and then your behavior. You don't just wake up in the morning and decide, I'm not going to be anxious today. Your hormones will tell you whether you are anxious or not. So dopamine is really, really important, but so is oxytocin, which is that hormone released when we feel connected to the people around us. So to simplify it a little bit, in a high-performing environment, what we're trying to find is not motivating people through adrenaline and stress hormones, okay? That's not sustainable, and that's why people burn out, and it also leads to poor decision-making and other behaviours we don't really want, like males communicating a lot less when they're marinating in stress. So what we prefer to do is try and motivate them through making sure the environment is stimulating dopamine and oxytocin together. And in the dopamine, it's not the Netflix or chocolate approach. It's the actual, if you feel you belong to a community, and that community has a vision of what it's trying to achieve together. Again, whether it's a sports team or whether it's a nation or everything in between, then if the leaders are able to articulate, this is a vision of where we want to go and what we want to do, and this is the mission we want to be our legacy, that is extremely motivating in a hormonal sense for people. And it's a very basic element of leadership which is probably diminished over the years, particularly amongst politicians, is that the way to motivate people is to paint a vision of something aspirational that we could all get to and show us the path to get there. That's what people want. And that's what actually, for most of our history, our tribal leaders were pretty good at doing.
Yes, give me a pathway to follow, which gives me a sense of purpose. I know that what I'm doing is leading towards some greater goal. And Anna Lemke in that book does say that her research shows if you want to sustain this, it's the delayed gratification. It's the hard work that goes on, which I guess is everything at that high performance level. Because I'm watching the Women's World Cup, which is being played in our two nations, well, your former nation, at the moment, and I've been quite struck by, in fact, and your book is responsible for this, by the way. I'm watching our Matildas, and I'm not just seeing a group of people who just want to win a cup. I'm sensing there's something holding them together and resolve that is different. And I don't know if you've been watching much of it in your world, because I believe your team is not necessarily going the whole distance. Are you seeing signs of this? And what are the signs when we watch? I mean, because sport is a great petri dish to look at this stuff. What do you look for? Can we see it from the spectator stands, or do you actually have to be closer to know whether there's that forged connection going on?
No, I mean, that's a great question. I do think you can observe teams performing, governments performing, other communities performing in a way whether they've got a sense of identity about what they're doing, or and a sense of purpose to what they do, or it looks like a collection of individuals who are in it to get some outcome or for their own selfish motivations or not. And you can certainly see that. And we're watching the Women's World Cup. I had coached Ali Riley, the captain of the New Zealand team, a couple of years ago, so I've had an interest in them, and they made some history, but unfortunately haven't been able to progress. But I actually think women's sport often is more pure than male sport. What I mean by that is, rather than having an obsession with an outcome and their contract and their financial optimization, all of these factors, which are not community, collective belonging factors. Often in the women's team, and I was able to spend a little bit of time with things on women's rugby team last year, just before they won their World Cup, is that there's a purity about, we are sacrificing a lot to be here. We're not being paid multi-millions, and that's not why we're here. We're actually representing our country. But not only that, we're representing a sport that's been probably disrespected over the years and still doesn't get the quality that it deserves. So I've heard them, they articulate, they talk like this, and therefore there is a very true purpose. And you can see it the way they play. They're very selfless. They have a sense of joy, which often is missing in men's sport. I remember during the Rugby World Cup last year, when the music was on in the stadium, the substitutes on the New Zealand bench were singing along to the Neil Diamond song during the game. Can you ever imagine a male team doing that? But there's something pure about that. So, I think you're right. I think you can watch that and you can feel whether that team has a soul or not and what they're doing.
Yeah, no, it's good. And even in the early days of English football, which is all very, very professional here, during the war, the women... I don't know if this was referenced in your book or I picked it somewhere else.
It was, yeah.
It was in your book?
Yeah.
Oh, it's such an amazing story. They were getting huge crowds. And I wonder if we resonate with that as spectators, that these people that are out there, like if you go 100 years earlier, those people who would travel across to play cricket and they were a plumber, they were a doctor, they were this and that. There is something more simple about it, because it is a game.
Right. You got me on a bit of a hobby horse there, because one of my principles is that I feel we disrespect our ancestors and their understanding of leadership.
Yeah.
Feel like we're very arrogant today. We think we've got all the strategy and technology and all the complexity, and we know better, and we don't really listen. But I honestly think our ancestors had a clear understanding of how to lead a group of people, because they weren't distracted by all those things. And I'm doing some research at the moment, actually, and this is a bit of a Kiwi-centric comment, but in 1924, we had our national rugby team, the All Blacks, came and played 32 games in the Northern Hemisphere and won them all. So they're called the Invincibles. And it's the centennial next year, and I'm doing some research, and I'll do in some way celebrate that next year.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is this is 100 years ago. The team on the 6-week voyage over did things like at 7 o'clock in the morning, they all sat on the deck with a surgeon actually who was travelling on the same trip, and they did breathing exercises. Okay, the breathing in the afternoon. Then they trained in the afternoon. Every single afternoon for an hour, the team sat in a circle on the deck. And this is a very interesting team, because nearly half the team fought in the First World War, but there were also 2 Maori teenagers in the team who were little boys during the First World War.
Yeah.
So a very diverse team in lots of different ways: religion, life experience, ethnicity. But in the afternoon for an hour, they sat in a circle, and the captain, who was a 26-year-old, the first time he ever captained the team, but every player to share with all the others what their vision was for that tour, what success would look like. And then just to talk about the position they played and articulate to the team what the key elements of it were. And following that, each of the players were open to add to their understanding of their position and how to be better at it. And they had every single afternoon. So the point I'm making here is, if I went to a team, in this interview now, I propose a team does that, people would say, Owen Eastwood, what a great coach. He's so forward-thinking. He's got such innovative ideas. And it's absolute bollocks. Our ancestors were doing it 100 years ago without all of this stuff. And so I think we should spend a bit less time listening to ourselves and a bit more time reconnecting back to some of the real achievements of the past and how they actually did it.
There's 2 things I need to follow up with here. They are connected together. The ship on the way over, 6 weeks, I think you said, that's, or as your fellow Kiwi would say, 6 months in a leaky boat. Right. It's a slower pace. And so there's a chance to saturate yourself, marinate yourself together in those things. That's one. And you've also, because I've been, as you probably sadly know, stalking you ever since reading this book, you made some comments about the Kiwi mindset on the international stage of we before me. I know that's a bit of an unformed question, but do either of those things prompt you to share anything that the slow pace, did that help set or nurture that sort of approach? And then this collective, not just me as the champion and it's just me who'll wear the gold medal, it's can we all get there?
Well, they're definitely connected. So in Belonging, I tell the story of the South African cricket team, and I was very fortunate to be invited in there in 2010, where they'd had a decade of very, very good players, but had only been world number one twice in the decade and lost the ranking a month after achieving it both times. So they couldn't sustain success. And what, touching on your point here, when I went in there, how much time do you spend on your culture? How much time do you spend on actually connecting people? How much time do you spend on talking about what actually it is that you represent, the Rainbow Nation? And the sort of answer was, we're just too busy to spend time doing that. And this comes back to what do we really value? And I think in today's world, we're so busy and we think we're so important the busier we are. And we've got technology which can make us feel even more important because we're on it 24 hours a day and we're checking emails and all of this, and somehow got to this mad position where we're too busy to invest time in having a conversation with a group of people. What the hell are we trying to do here? Why are we doing it? And trying to get to know each other in order to build some trust and connection. And, they took our advice and understood we needed to go and spend 3 days in the bush as a team, as a group of, not as a team, as a collection of individuals to become a team. So I talk about that in quite a bit of depth, and that was absolutely transformative. And then the next 4 years, with pretty much a similar group of players, same group of players, they were world number one for 4 consecutive years. The only thing that changed really was that they connected in a different way. It was all about culture. So, yeah, I think that time you need to spend together doesn't have to be 6 weeks, but, if you're telling me you're too busy to have an offside or an away day or in pre-season for a team to spend this time, then I think that's pretty poor leadership. And in terms of the me and we, each country has an identity story. New Zealand was, first of all, found and populated by the Maori people, who are very, very community-based culture. Then actually the pioneers, the European, British pioneers that came over also left a form of society which is extremely hierarchical. And they wanted really the idea, which is an Australian idea as well, as having a fair go. They wanted everyone to have a fair go, fair opportunity to own property, fair opportunity to farm some land, a fair opportunity to have a say in the way that the place was governed, all of these concepts. And I think New Zealand has done reasonably well, notwithstanding its growth, to maintain value that we put the community before individuals here. And hopefully that will last for a long time, because a lot of Western society is becoming more and more individualistic.
Mm. And in fact, I was telling a client today that I was going to be talking to you, and she said, a friend of hers is a doctor in New Zealand, and he had to learn very quickly that when someone came into emergency or to the hospital, he had to learn that he would have to talk to 30 family members to explain the state of what's happened, not just one. And that is a real culture shock to us individuals. Yeah. Is that just a weird story, or does that make sense to you?
No, not at all. Not at all. I think I haven't lived in New Zealand for a few years, but I know when I was living in New Zealand, with some people from some backgrounds like Maori culture would bring family members to job interviews because that's all about.
Yes.
Family community, and if you want to employ me, then this is something I want my family to be comfortable with, but also this is an opportunity for you to have a window into who I am. And there are, certainly in the government sector, there were complete written protocols about that's completely acceptable and fine. And the thing I like about that is it doesn't have to be exclusive. So you could be a British migrant who's just turned up, but you might also feel comfortable. You've just come to the other side of the world to live. You also have the right to say, you know what, my whole family have taken an incredible risk here for me to come and work, and I want them to be present at the interview or when I meet the doctor about whatever these issues are.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's cool. And so it's a positive thing for me that in contemporary times, rather than going backwards and moving to this more individualistic, American approach, that we're actually trying to hold tight to the idea that this is all about belonging to communities and belonging to strong families, and got to promote that wherever we can.
And there are pockets in our society that get that. A long-term mate of mine, Brett Williams, who's been on the Adelaide show, is a family therapist, and he uses a systems approach because everyone is part of a system. And I can't help but think the family member coming to the job interview would actually minimise the sort of abuse and horridness that can happen in some workplaces when you're just dealing with an atomised individual and forgetting that they have a mother or a father or a brother or a sister. It would chasten some excesses of people who wanted to break rules. That's all I'm saying. I think it's so frustratingly simple, but we don't let many of us just continue on status quo in the rush and tumble of life.
No.
Two more last things about drawn from the Belonging book before we just lightly touch on how we approach trying to discern community and things. One is the bit for me in the book that really had the coin drop, and I understood that this has practical applications, is when you shared the story of being asked to work with the commanders that lead NATO. And I wonder if you could just encapsulate that, because the way I tell it to other people is that you brought these, I think it was 4 leaders that came together, probably alpha-type humans to be in that sort of role. You got them to spend time to tell the story of how each one of them got to where they are, and it helped people see connections between each other and also deepen appreciation and respect for each other. That's how I sell it. That's how I tell the story. Mm-hmm. What have I overlooked? What have I got wrong?
No, not at all. Yes, I was very fortunate to be invited to work with the 3 generals who run NATO's military. Yeah, they're all 4-star generals, so they're the top 3 generals in the world. The US, who's the Supreme Allied Commander for Europe, and he was the 14th Supreme Allied Commander for Europe. The first one was Eisenhower. The deputy, Sir Richard Sharif, was a 4-star British general. The first person in his role was Montgomery. So these all followed the Second World War. What had happened is not too different from what we've been talking about, is that they are responsible. At that time I worked with them, were responsible for the situation in Iraq, Afghanistan, but lots of other NATO military issues as well. And they each had about, I think, 12 or 14 people on their own staff. So literally when the 3 of them would meet, which wasn't very often, but when the 3 of them would meet, it would be 36 people in the room. So they actually, and the agenda was like terrifying, what's happening in Afghanistan and all of these things. So they, it was very complicated what they do, but they didn't feel they were working as a team. That was probably the key insight. So they had management consultants who worked with them, and they wanted to try and break through this. So anyway, word had got around about some of the work I'd done, and I was invited to meet with the consultants and ultimately appointed to work with the generals. But the first thing we did, and this is, again, this is from all of our culture, but certainly from Maori culture, is it exercises that should have been done at the start but hadn't been, was done 2 years in. But let's actually just get away from everybody. No staff are invited. Okay? And they didn't like that. They didn't like that. But we found this, they found a place. I just still don't know exactly where it was. It was all secluded, taken there, people with machine guns everywhere. Quite an exciting day for a New Zealander. But we just started off, and I just said, you've worked together, and these are some of the most important issues the world's facing. But we're not a team because we don't really know who each other are. And I just got each of them to tell their story of where they've come from in order to be sitting around that table. I mean, there's nothing complicated about it. And as I wrote in Belonging, there's a couple of things really emerged from that. I mean, first of all, 2 of the generals were crying as they told their story to each other, which just shows you how authentic they are, but also how profound all this stuff is. Secondly, without any prompting by me, that they all spoke about the land that they or their ancestors came from as a way of introducing themselves, which crossed over beautifully to this Maori idea of pepeha, where you introduce yourself in a ritualistic way by naming the mountain and the rivers and the geography of where you come, and then you introduce your family, and then you introduce yourself. Now, so that was fascinating for me, that I didn't frame it, prompt it in any way. I just said, introduce yourself to each other. And they spoke about their ancestors coming from the islands in Greece, another one from Kenya as a colonial. And then they introduced themselves, and they did it in a very humble way. And some of the stories were just outrageously interesting, which I write in Belonging. I relay the stories of their own journeys. I mean, some of it quite remarkable. So, that had an amazing effect. And in fact, when we had lunch together that day, after we'd done this, I actually just decided, even though it would have been amazing, I just decided to leave them alone. So the four of us were supposed to have lunch together, and I actually just left them alone. Just as a coaching point, I just felt I need to leave you. You're having such a connection, and in fact, I felt I'd dilute it. Is there another? They were, what? No. But I said, no, it's okay. So I just left the three of them, and I remember just looking in, and they were laughing, and it just completely transformed their relationship and their ability to work together and also to have things like psychological safety and safe conflict with each other. After that, they're much more capable of being able to do that, and also to push their staff away and just say, look, we can talk through this. We don't need this to be overcomplicated.
I got a strong sense that in some ways it's just lurking beneath the surface in all of us, the ability to tap into this. It just takes some deliberate action.
It does.
The last thing from the book, which really disarmed me, being an Aussie, and we have some tension between Australians and New Zealanders, good-natured. The South African cricket test with the sandpaper incident, the way you brought to light the human side of that, I think is worth just bearing on briefly, because it talks to the power that compels us to belong to a team, sometimes meaning we cross the line.
Well, I mean, that was an amazing story from a personal point of view in a number of ways, because I was working with the South Africa cricket team before that series, and I always help a team in the preparation for competition. That's my main place where I help. I'm not hanging around during the test match giving them advice on how to bowl to Steve Smith or anything. I'm trying to help them be as connected and clear. So one of the things we will always do is preview what's coming. And what was interesting was we previewed what the Aussies would bring, and sledging was part of it. And so what we do is we preview it, but then we preview our response to it. Because if we just leave these guys to deal with it in the heat of the moment, we can make some horrendous decisions. So we make sure. So I do this with all the teams I work with. England football team, we do the same thing before we compete. So it's nothing complicated about it. It's just creating scenarios around these are the things that are likely to happen, which could put us off our game. So let's have a pre-rehearsed response, which we all locked into when it happens. So we'd spent a day doing this in terms of how the Aussies would come at us and how we would counter it, but we hadn't predicted that particular scenario playing out. But having said that, the fact that adversity was going to come and there would be pressure allowed us to probably deal with that reasonably well. But I think coming from the point of your question, yes, I remember feeling extremely sorry for Cameron Bancroft, a very inexperienced young player who was put in that position. And I decided, and like with the South African cricket team, one of our key players was Hashim Amla. And he was the first ever Muslim captain of South Africa. And I remember him saying to the team once, when they were criticising an opposition, might have even been Australia, he was saying, I don't agree with any of this. We should love our opponent. Our opponent is trying to do everything that we are doing. They are representing people in the way that we care about the people we represent. They have worked as hard and sacrificed as much to get here. And also, we cannot do our thing. We can't express ourselves, and we can't try and inspire people unless we get to compete with them. So I don't want to hear any more of this negative talk about them. I go out there and I love my opponent. So I loved what he said, and it stuck with me. So after that Sandpaper Gate thing, I actually did a bit of digging around Bancroft, and I found that quote from him, which I put in Belonging, which was something along the lines of, all I wanted to do as a young player in that team is to belong. All I wanted to do is be accepted. So obviously when a senior player or senior players come to me and ask me to do something, all I want them to do is have their approval. So I do it.
Yeah.
The last thing I want to do is to say no to senior players and make myself feel even more like an outsider and that I don't belong there. And I think, that was very sad to read those words. But at the same time, I felt like that's the biggest bit of mitigation that Bancroft can have, is if people understand this primal need to belong, then they can understand his actions and be a bit less severe in judging him.
And of course, then this summer, we had the great wicketkeeper stumping of Carey to run out Bairstow. Did you see Sandpaper Gate all over again, or was this a different kettle of fish?
No, a completely different kettle of fish. I mean, I love watching the Ashes as a Kiwi because, I'm not a vested
yes,
interest
of course.
in it. But there's a lot of, if you know the history of cricket, there's a lot. The English are quite, in cricket, historically quick to not only Australia, but to call other teams unethical and against the spirit of the game. It's something that they will throw out there quite a lot. So I don't get overexcited when it gets lobbed out there. And obviously that's hard to reconcile with what happened in Bodyline in 1932-33 as well. So
exactly. At Adelaide
it's all good fun. It's all part of the rivalry.
Yeah. All right. So to bring this home, one of the reasons I really was hoping to have this chat with you is I'm reflecting on 10 years of doing this. I often talk about the Adelaide show being, in really sort of probably noble, up myself ways, a gift to the community. It's a passion. I love talking. I'm at my most relaxed when I'm interviewing someone. It's just where I find my groove. I love it. And in Australia, Adelaide had been the butt of jokes as the boring city, and which is why we started. But over time, it's more than that. There are so many interesting humans who are passionately engaged in different endeavours, and the mass media don't give them light of day, but there's so much from the marrow that we can suck out of their lives. But that said, your book has suggested to me that I've been dancing in my little world and I'm not sure that I've fully grounded this in a deeply community way. And I just wanted, in a rare moment, for your thoughts to share what sort of questions would you ask of yourself if you were trying to start something that you wanted to earnestly be useful to more than just yourself in a community?
Well, we can go back to where we started, which was that Maori idea of whakapapa. So, and by the way, I've been to Adelaide and spent time there and absolutely adore the place.
Oh, thank goodness.
I think you're incredibly lucky to. That'd be the one city in Australia that I would personally be very happy to live in. So we'll go back to whakapapa. Adelaide has its own origin story, and that predates Europeans. Okay, and so it's a long story, but you are part of the line of people that make up the people of Adelaide, right? So you are as I'm sure some of your ancestors, and they would have come from different places as well, but you're part of the Adelaide story. All the people that are going to come in generations and generations in the future, you're part of this line of people. And the way I would think about it is that, the sun has now moved on to you, and as part of you, you're a guardian for the community you live in. We all are, just as families, you're a guardian of the family, you're a guardian of this community, and what you've decided to do is to create the Adelaide show, which is something which celebrates this unique, amazing place, which people feel a profound sense of belonging to. It's a way of connecting the past, the present, and the future of Adelaide through different conversations and different experiences you can have. It's a place where people come and feel part of a community. Listening to your pod and the pods I listen to, I genuinely feel I'm part of that community. It's quite, even though I never get to meet the other people in the community, there's something about that. And even when Yeah, so to me, that's in this day and age, which is technology is important. It's important to be part of a community, so people can be part of your community. Ultimately, when the son moves on from you in the future, this will be part of the legacy that you have left. And I think it's a wonderful thing to have done. And there's no limits really around how you can utilise that, is there? Because the idea of representing all of Adelaide, the idea of creating a place of community, the idea of creating opportunities for an Adelaide to connect with each other and to have experiences, all of that is like quite mind-boggling as to where you could go with it all. So to me, I think if you elevate it above, your own interest in interviewing people and some of those things, and elevate it to, I'm actually doing this for a purpose. It's for the people of Adelaide.
Yeah,
it's to showcase us, it's to represent us. Then where could it go?
Well, it's fascinating. I think in getting ready for this, because your book really does, it ricochets in my head. I changed the wording on the homepage from originally about, I forget what it was, to you are not alone. And you can spend time with people who also share South Australia with you. And I think, to me, that's where if that is earnestly what is being done here, then I think that's fine. It will carry through. But I know there are people who run different groups and communities. This is not just me. This is for anyone else listening in who wants to do something community-based. I really do appreciate the fact that whakapapa vision of looking for where this had begun and acknowledging that, hey, the sun's shining on you at the moment. What's your responsibility? And what do you think for the future? How do we check ourselves to make sure it's not ego-driven? Have you got any... Because in sport and some of your big performers, ego must surely get tangled up. Is there a way to disarm it? Or can we, like a surfer, making use of the energy of a wave, can we harness the energy of our egos?
That's a great way to put it. I mean, we want ego, but we want it to be aligned with a higher purpose. So, there is no great teams I'm aware of where there aren't strong egos, if you want to use that expression. So that's not a problem. And the same with the Adelaide show and also what is not a problem as well is if we have a financial incentive or motivation around what we're doing, there's nothing wrong with that. What's important is to be authentic about what we're trying to achieve and why, and articulate that. But you can do both things at once. You can have an amazing personal journey and have your ego flying as well as representing your country. And you can also have a business which brings great value and benefit to a community and at the same time has a financial engine which you're running as well. Those things can go together. That's what's about being authentic about what they are. And, sometimes these don't have to be things that last for 100 years. You might decide the Adelaide show, for example, is something which is so interwoven with who you are that it's a project that you will do for a set period of time, may not go to another generation. So that they're all fine. There are no rules around this, but it's just making sure that when the sun's shining on you, you make the most of the opportunity. And, from what I can see, I think you definitely are doing that, but there's so much other direction you can possibly explore.
Yeah, so maybe
I wish where I grew up had a show like this. Like I grew up in Southland in the very south of the South Island of New Zealand. There is no place for me to go to feel my identity and to connect in real time with people in my community. Now, actually this year they've started up an online newspaper for the first time because they lost the historic one, basically. It's all national media.
Yep.
And so that's great. So you actually get the sports preview and the local sports and then the reviews and what's happening with the mayor and the election. I love that. That was what was in the newspaper when I was a kid. So I will look at that, but it's pretty sort of small. But I would love my place of belonging to have a show and a place where I know other people like me are connected to it and feel a sense of belonging. I would love that, and I wouldn't limit the opportunity around that either.
Yeah, because we do have a lot of expats from South Australia who listen into this all around the world. I guess they're tapping in to voices, to references. They
nostalgia, identity.
Yeah,
that's all important.
We do touch on nostalgia every now and then, although I will say New Zealand South Island, I haven't been North Island, had a most amazing trip there. There's a little town halfway down the South Island on a lake, which possibly doesn't limit the number, where the cinema, my wife and I were there, we went to see Jason Bourne, one of those movies, and inside the cinema, there were weird chairs, there was a Volkswagen with the roof cut off. It was just this weird thing, and they had an interval. The movie stopped, and everyone rushed out, so we did. They bake fresh chocolate chip cookies ready for interval. We got the last two. It was an amazing experience. Do you know where that town, do you know about this?
No, I wouldn't say. I mean, there's a few candidates, but no. But it's that quirkiness, and it just makes you feel a bit different and a bit special, and that's what identity really is. Yeah.
I just want people to follow their curiosity, power that up, and let them connect with each other and ask questions and, be together. Owen Eastwood, I really appreciate, seriously, your time. This book, Belonging, I heartily recommend it. Have you got something else in the offing that people can also put their attention on? Other books coming or other sources? You're probably very busy yourself, but we've already said at the beginning, busyness is no excuse.
Yeah, no, it's definitely not. No, this year I'm getting back into being a bit more creative. So I've got an idea for something next year, but I'll probably wait a year or two in terms of a book, because I like writing about real life challenges and experiences. So I need to accumulate them over time. I'm working on the Ryder Cup this year with the European teams. So it's been an adventure, and had to work with Harlequins Rugby in London, and we've also had an adventure a couple of seasons ago where we won the title from sort of last.
Wow.
So, building up a few stories and adventures. So I'd rather not force the next book, but make sure I keep learning a lot and actually delivering stuff with teams, and then, relaying that back to whoever's interested. So that'll come down the line, but I want to do a few creative things in the meantime.
Yeah, and in my day job running Talked About Marketing, my colleague who put me onto your book, David Olney, we've started last night at the time of recording. We had our first meeting of our own little community of hand-selected people. We don't want to cross-sell to each other. We just want to drink from a lake and learn and share ideas. And as we did the NATO thing, there were tears as people shared some of their stories. So I just want you to know that your book is not just something, it actually impacts people. You probably know this already, but it really resonates. Well, it's very kind of you. I mean, I do realise that I did something with IBM earlier this year where I think they had 800 people. It was actually an online workshop, and people in Brazil, and people were, I took them through that ritual of belonging. Yeah.
And people in Brazil in tears, people in Portugal, people in the States. It was quite. This was online. It was quite overwhelming seeing people so emotional around it, and it actually sad in some ways. Like, why do we not, in a normalized way, get people just to share who the hell they are and where they come from and what they want to achieve in their lives?
Hopefully, this conversation gives our listeners permission to do that. Owen Eastwood, the Pied Piper of Tears, but also the author of Belonging. Thank you so much for joining the Adelaide Show.
Well, thank you. It was great to chat with you, Steve.
And now it's time for the musical pilgrimage.
In the musical pilgrimage, our featured song this week is La La by Suedan. Suedan is a dynamic blues and roots duo, and the reason I chose them tonight is they were formed in 2016 when Sue and Dan decided to play this wonderful music together, and that's where the year that our wine came from that we had at the beginning of the program in the SA Drink of the Week. So that's how that ties in. It doesn't take much, does it? Look, they're both very talented musos. They create soul-stirring music. Dan does the vocals, typically. A lot of intricate cigar box guitar skills come together quite harmoniously when he's in full flight. Meanwhile, Sue is adding the rhythmic beats of Cajun. It adds depth to their sound. Amazing stuff. Lots of storytelling in their songs. Their performances are typically electrifying, even though they're typically done acoustically. Audiences love it, and they are all over the blues music scene. And they're a traditional blues blend. They've got a bit of a modern twist, and that's also, Dan thought this would be a good reason to choose this song, because one of the albums is Route 31. And Route 31 is named after a coastal drive that takes in our beautiful coastline south of Adelaide, from O'Sullivan's Beach to Selleck's Beach. And guess how long the road is? 31 kilometres. Yes, that's why it's called Route 31. Lots of wonderful things. And Dan said to me he was inspired driving along that. And out of that inspiration came a song like this from the album Route 31. Here is La La by Suedan.
Silver paint on my jeans, my hair, it is a mess. Some people are perturbed at the way I choose to dress, but I'm singing la la do 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 da do da da do do da do 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 da do 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 do. Mother's a spiritual being, father refuses to see, surrounded on all sides by strong philosophy, but I'm singing la la da 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 he talks of Marx. Mother, she mentions Christ. I must admit I've shouted, the workers united will never be defeated. And Hare Krishna once or twice, but I'm singing la da 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 my jeans, a pair of mirror shades, sit around playing my guitar, feels as though I got it made, when I'm singing la 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 do do da do 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 da do do do
I can almost feel being around the Selleck's Beach area right now, listening to that beautiful music. Thank you, Suedan. That is La La, and the album's called Route 31. I've got the link to their website in the show notes. That's it for the first of our Month of Tuesday episodes for the Adelaide Show's 10th birthday. Yes, it was August 29, 2013 when this whole thing began. And then, just like now, when we sign off, we will tip our hat to our former late Premier, Don Dunstan. So until next week, it's good night from me, Steve Davis. Good night, Don.
The Adelaide Show podcast is produced by my dad, Steve Davis. If you want to start a podcast or get some help producing creative content, talk to him. Visit stevedavis.com.au. Thanks, AJ. I'm Caitlin Davis, and I agree with everything my sister said. But there's one more thing to say. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please leave a rating or a review, because that will make my dad really happy. Oh, and one more thing. If you really, really liked it, please help a friend put the Adelaide Show on their phone. Thanks for listening. Buzz, buzz, I want to be.
Adelaide, 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 ooh, Adelaide, 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 ooh.